Our reading today is taken from a poem by Rebecca Parker, and I have to admit that I stole this from materials that our interim candidate sent to us. We read a lot of her things, and this one I really, really liked. It's a beautiful poem, but I'm just reading 3 stanzas. Your gifts, whatever you discover them to be, can be used to bless or curse the world. The mind's power, the strength of the hands, the reaches of the heart, the gift of speaking, listening, imagining, seeing, waiting. Any of these can serve to feed the hungry, bind up wounds, welcome the stranger, praise what is sacred, do the work of justice, or offer love. The choice to bless the world is more than an act of will, a moving forward into the world with the intention to do good. It is an act of recognition, a confession of surprise, a grateful acknowledgement that in the midst of a broken world, unspeakable beauty, grace, and mystery abide. There is an embrace of kindness that encompasses all life, even yours. The choice will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, the chorus of life welcoming you. None of us can save the world alone. Together, that is another possibility waiting. Happy Mother's Day. Lot of nice themes on Mother's Day. As Mother's Day turns 104 this year, it's mostly known as a time for brunches and gifts and cards and offerings and outpourings of love and appreciation. But the holiday has some somber roots. It was founded after the Civil War to create a moment in time for mourning women to remember fallen soldiers and to work for peace and reconciliation. Now, I'm sure many of you know Joan Rivers. You remember her? Okay. Now, as Joan Rivers used to ask, can we talk? Joan Rivers attributed her success in life to saying what everyone else was thinking. So, can we talk truthfully this morning about some of what is rarely spoken about? Being a mother, the somber roots. I want to talk about the collective psychological trauma connected with motherhood and the courage required of mothers. It's not going to be that bad. Okay. Let's start with a reflection on my experience as I was considering motherhood. In the late 60s, 1960s, that is, I read the book Summerhill by A.S. Neill, an account of his famous early progressive Summerhill School in England. The book's intent is to demonstrate the origins and the effects of unhappiness, and then to show how to raise children to avoid this unhappiness. As I read the chapters about how children develop neuroses, I became especially frightened by the author's assertion that if a pregnant woman was nervous, and who wouldn't be when they're pregnant, and tensed her abdomen a lot, that it could negatively affect the future happiness of her child. In addition, I was taught in my profession that cold mothering causes autism. So I was kind of a miserable bunch of fear, anxiety, and doubt about motherhood, fearing that I could directly affect my child's happiness or development by my behavior and my responses, even unintentional ones. On the positive side, I was one of the first generation of women who, through the development of oral contraception, that is the pill, could actually consider when to have children, how many to bring into the world, and whether one might be suited for motherhood. For thousands of years, women did not have reproductive choices or good reproductive health care. Can we talk about that for a minute? My great-grandmother, Willie Gertrude Barnhill, died immediately after birth in the late 1890s. Mortality rates related to pregnancy were high. 4,500 maternal deaths per 100,000 childbirths in 1890. Although death rates from many other conditions were high, those were at least among people who had been ill beforehand. Death in relation to childbirth was mostly in fit young women who had been quite well before becoming pregnant. Pregnancy was the leading cause of death among young females. The loss of life and disruption to families was devastating. My fears paled in comparison to the fears that women dealt with continuously before there was access to effective birth control. Let's talk about the larger psychological picture here. Let's consider the concept of collective psychological trauma over time. This is a phenomenon that happens when social and policy systems create and support violence and trauma against a particular subgroup of people, in this case, women. I would describe this phenomenon as a cumulative set of trauma experiences over time that women incorporate into their group psyche and pass through the generations. Responses to that innate emotional knowledge of the probability of death as a result of pregnancy could be fear, anxiety, despair. So, is it possible that over time, women as a group have incorporated into their emotional selves a sense of fear and anxiety about motherhood, which is passed through the generations? Was my fear of motherhood psychically attached to the death of my great-grandmother and the devastation of my grandmother's family? How have social and political systems been at fault in traumatizing women? It's easy to list the ways, but the story of Margaret Sanger is a good example of the ways in which systems and policies have intentionally created violence against women and mothers. When women were dying in childbirth and orphans were filling the streets of New York City, effective birth control methods were intentionally denied to women by doctors conspiring with husbands, religious leaders, and politicians. That is, until Margaret Sanger and others fought for the right to reproductive choice and reproductive health care. One of Sanger's core beliefs was, no woman can call herself free who does not own and control her own body. Her motto was, no gods, no masters. Sanger was vilified for her views everywhere. Unfortunately, Margaret Sanger and the organization that evolved from her work, Planned Parenthood, are still vilified today. And women continue to march for control of their bodies, a basic human right. Now, here is a case in point regarding how our current political systems perpetrate trauma on mothers, children, and families. In April 2018, Michigan State Senator Mike Shirkey, our senator, introduced a bill to limit Medicaid eligibility. Michigan expanded Medicaid eligibility in 2013 with the Healthy Michigan program, which now ensures almost 700,000 people who fit the criteria of being financially impoverished. Mr. Shirkey sponsored Senate Bill 897, which restricts and requires able-bodied Medicaid recipients to work 29 hours per week to continue receiving their health insurance. People would be exempt from these requirements if they meet certain criteria, like being over 65, having a disability, being pregnant, or being a caretaker for a dependent with a disability or a dependent under the age of 6. Bill 897 is made possible because of a federal government executive change in policy, which until recently had prohibited states from initiating such requirements. Now, a handful of states have applied for federal waivers to implement work requirements, and Senate Bill 897 would have Michigan join them. On the surface, this bill seems reasonable. However, from my point of view, there are two very obvious problems with the passage of this bill. Number one, employers don't schedule part-time employees for up to 29 hours per week every week. There is no guarantee that women could find consistent work and could easily lose their health insurance from month to month. In addition, even for able-bodied women, work requirements can be insurmountable for the low-income individual who can't afford transportation or childcare, or may have a chronic mental and/or physical illness that may not be classified as a disability. Part-time workers get little sick leave. If injured or sick for a length of time, a woman would be out of work and lose her insurance. The second thing that I see is that the paperwork and agency oversight for managing all these records required would be expansive and very costly. And the second point in the slide says the Michigan Senate Fiscal Agency did an analysis of the bill and projected it would cost the state $30 million to implement and police this program. How will this impact women who need health care during pregnancy? How will this impact infants after birth? How long will it take them to get their insurance? How will women consistently obtain and pay for their monthly contraceptive medications? Do policies matter? You bet they do. And until our social, political, and financial systems seek to protect women's inalienable rights as humans and mothers, we continue to add trauma experiences into that group psyche. We continue to live with fear and anxiety about our futures and those of our children. Now, we're going to talk about some women who did some things about things. Change will take courage, and courage is our antidote. Mothers have been courageous in speaking out for change for women and children throughout history in spite of the consequences. Courage has created change and given women hope. One of the more dramatic examples, right here, Mary Harris, or Mother Jones, put children in animal cages to raise awareness of child labor issues, and led the Children's Crusade campaign that took place in July of 1903. During that episode, dozens of children workers were among the marchers who followed Jones from Philadelphia to New York City to protest labor conditions, earning the event the name the Children's Crusade. That particular campaign did not lead to immediate change, but her idea that showing the world the children who are directly affected by policies about which they cannot vote was a powerful one. A more recent example of mothers uniting and courageously speaking truth to power is the group Mothers Demand Action. And this is information that I took from their website. The Sandy Hook School mass shooting rocked the nation. It forced us to take a hard look at gun violence that kills 96 Americans and injures hundreds more every single day. It was out of that grief and outrage that Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America began and grew rapidly to match the NRA in passion and power. Together with Everytown for Gun Safety, Moms Demand Action has closed the intensity gap and proven that in red, blue, and purple states, gun safety is a winning issue. In the last 5 years, Moms Demand Action and now Students Demand Action have become a driving force in the gun violence prevention movement, leading political, cultural, and electoral progress. The resulting victories are owed to the dedicated and tireless work of our grassroots army of volunteers in the face of tremendous opposition. And again, our children are on the march. I don't know if you can read the sign that the young man has up, but it says, "Arm me with school psychologists, smaller class sizes, books and funding, not guns." My last example of a courageous mother is of a Nobel Peace Laureate, Betty Williams. She won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1976 for her work in bringing peace to Ireland. In 1976, 3 innocent children were killed in an incident in Belfast. And this housewife and secretary, Betty Williams, witnessed the tragedy. She decided to launch an appeal against the meaningless use of violence in the conflict between the Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. Betty was joined by the dead children's aunt, Mairead Corrigan, and together they founded the peace organization, the Community of Peace People. She organized a peace march to the children's graves that 10,000 Protestant and Catholic women attended. The Irish Republican Army disrupted the peaceful walk, but 35,000 people marched with them the following week to protest violence in their country. Betty Williams currently serves as the president of World Centers of Compassion for Children, whose mission is to provide a strong political voice for children in areas afflicted by war, hunger, and social, economic, or political upheaval. And we still march. Now, the question that comes to my mind is, how can we show compassion and understanding in our society and government so that motherhood can be healed, psyches restored, and children saved? More to my point is, how can we be more compassionate toward and supportive of mothers in this beloved community called UUCEL? How can we march together in body or in spirit to heal not only ourselves, but also heal the world? I hope the lesson learned today is that scars run deep, and accumulated scars affect everyone, whether we're mothers or not. I also hope that women can believe that courageously telling our truth is the only antidote to the collective suffering we feel. Our courage and passion are remarkable and a hopeful light for the world. Let us march together in body or in spirit to heal not only ourselves, but also the world. May our courage be our strength. May our passion be our prayer. May it be so.